After World War II, Japan was a country in deep pain. Cities were destroyed, industries were weak, and many people had lost hope. Buildings were broken, families were struggling, and jobs were very hard to find. The economy was almost gone, and the future looked uncertain. But even in this difficult time, some people believed that Japan could rise again. They believed that with hard work, new ideas, and strong determination, they could rebuild not only their lives, but also their country. Among these dreamers were two men who would later change the world of technology forever, Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita. Masaru Ibuka was an engineer with a creative mind. He loved building things and solving problems. Even during the war, he had worked on technology projects, but after the war ended, he wanted to use his skills for something peaceful and meaningful. Akio Morita, on the other hand, came from a family that had been running a traditional sake business for generations. But Morita was different. He did not want to follow the old path. He was curious about science and business, and he wanted to create something new that could reach beyond Japan. When these two men met, they quickly realized that they shared the same vision: to build a company that would create innovative products and bring new life to Japan. In 1946, in a small damaged building in Tokyo, they started a company called Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo, which means Tokyo Telecommunications Engineering Corporation. It was not a big company. In fact, it was very small, with only a few workers and very little money. The office was simple, and sometimes they did not even have enough equipment to work properly. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in passion and determination. They believed that even a small team could create something great if they worked hard and thought differently. At the beginning, they did not have a clear path. They experimented with different ideas, trying to find something that would work. One of their first products was an electric rice cooker. It sounded like a useful idea, but it did not work well. The rice was often undercooked or overcooked, and customers were not satisfied. This failure could have discouraged them, but instead, they learned from it. They understood that creating good products required not only ideas but also careful testing and improvement. Despite early failures, they did not give up. They kept searching for new opportunities. Soon they began working on repairing radios. Radios were very important at that time because they allowed people to hear news and music, bringing some comfort to their lives. By fixing radios, the small company started to earn some money and gain experience in electronics. This step, though simple, helped them understand what people needed and how technology could make life better. Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita also had a different way of thinking compared to many other business leaders at that time. They were not only focused on making money, they wanted to create something unique, something that would make their company stand out. They believed in innovation, which means creating new and better ways of doing things. This mindset would later become one of the most important parts of Sony. As the company slowly grew, they started working on more advanced projects. One of their early goals was to develop new electronic devices that could be used by ordinary people. At that time, many electronic products were large, expensive, and difficult to use. Ibuka and Morita wanted to change that. They wanted to make products that were smaller, more affordable, and easier for people to enjoy in their daily lives. Life was still not easy for them. There were many challenges. Money was always a problem, and sometimes they were not sure if they could continue. There were also technical challenges, as the technology they wanted to create did not always exist yet. They had to learn, experiment, and sometimes fail again and again before finding success. But each failure made them stronger and more determined. Another important part of their journey was their belief in teamwork. They treated their employees with respect and encouraged them to share ideas. This created an environment where people felt motivated and inspired to do their best. Instead of following strict rules, they allowed creativity to grow, and this helped the company develop new and exciting products. As time passed, their hard work began to show results. The small company that started in a broken building was slowly becoming more stable. People started to notice their efforts, and their reputation began to grow. They were no longer just a small repair shop. They were becoming a company with potential. But even as things improved, Ibuka and Morita knew that this was only the beginning. They had bigger dreams of creating products that could reach people not just in Japan, but all around the world. They began to think about how they could expand beyond their local market. This idea was not common at that time, especially for a small Japanese company. Many people thought it was too ambitious, even impossible. But Ibuka and Morita believed that if they could create truly innovative products, the world would notice them. They were willing to take risks and try new approaches, even if it meant facing more challenges. Their journey was just starting, and the road ahead was still uncertain. They had passion, vision, and a growing sense of purpose, but they had not yet created the breakthrough that would change everything. As they continued to experiment and push their limits, they were moving closer to a moment that would define their future and begin to shape their place in the world of technology. As the small company continued to grow, Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita knew that repairing radios and trying small ideas would not be enough to build something truly great. They needed a breakthrough, a product that would not only work well, but also show the world that their company was capable of real innovation. They wanted to create something new, something that people had not seen before, and something that would make life easier and more enjoyable. This was not an easy goal, especially for a company with limited money and resources, but they believed that with hard work and creativity, they could achieve it. During this time, new technology was beginning to appear in different parts of the world. One of the most exciting inventions was the transistor, a small electronic component that could replace the large vacuum tubes used in radios and other devices. Vacuum tubes were big, fragile, and used a lot of power. Transistors, on the other hand, were small, efficient, and more reliable. When Masaru Ibuka learned about this new technology, he immediately saw its potential. He believed that transistors could change the future of electronics. At that time, transistor technology was mainly developed in the United States, and it was not easy for a small Japanese company to access it. But Ibuka and Morita were determined. They decided to take a big risk by investing in this new technology. They worked hard to get a license to use transistors, even though it cost a lot of money for their small company. Many people thought this was too risky. Some believed that the company should focus on safer ideas instead of spending so much on something uncertain. But Ibuka and Morita trusted their vision. Once they had access to transistor technology, the real challenge began. The technology was still new, and it was not easy to use. Their team had to learn how to work with transistors and find ways to use them in practical products. This required a lot of experiments, testing, and patience. There were many failures along the way. Sometimes the devices did not work properly, and sometimes they broke easily. But instead of giving up, the team kept improving their designs step by step. Finally, after many attempts, they succeeded in creating one of the first transistor radios in Japan. This was a major achievement for the company. The radio was smaller than traditional radios, used less power, and was easier to carry. It was not perfect at first, but it showed great promise. This product marked the beginning of a new direction for the company that would later become Sony. However, creating the product was only part of the challenge. The next step was to convince people to buy it. At that time, many customers were used to larger radios and were unsure about the new, smaller design. Some people doubted its quality and performance. To overcome this, Akio Morita focused on marketing and communication. He understood that people needed to see and experience the product to trust it. Morita had a bold idea. Instead of only selling the radios in Japan, he wanted to take them to the international market, especially the United States. This was a very ambitious plan for a small company. Traveling abroad, understanding a different market, and competing with established companies were all very difficult tasks. But Morita believed that if their product was truly innovative, it could succeed anywhere. When they introduced their transistor radios to the American market, They faced many challenges. At first, sales were slow. People were not familiar with the brand, and they were unsure about buying from a foreign company. But Morita did not give up. He worked hard to build relationships with distributors and retailers. He also paid attention to what customers wanted. For example, American consumers liked products that were not only functional, but also stylish and easy to use. One clever decision they made was to design radios that could fit into a shirt pocket. Even though the radios were slightly bigger than a standard pocket, they marketed them as pocket radios. This idea attracted a lot of attention, especially among young people. Suddenly, radios were no longer just devices kept at home. They became personal items that people could carry anywhere. This changed how people used technology in their daily lives. As sales began to grow, the company gained confidence. Their transistor radios started to become popular, and their reputation improved. People began to see them as a company that could create innovative and reliable products. This success also gave them the financial support they needed to invest in new ideas and technologies. But success did not mean the journey was easy. There were still many obstacles ahead. Competitors started to notice their progress and began developing their own transistor products. The market was becoming more competitive, and the company needed to continue innovating to stay ahead. Ibuka and Morita understood that one success was not enough. They needed to keep moving forward and find new ways to surprise and satisfy their customers. Another important lesson they learned during this time was the importance of quality. They realized that to build trust, their products had to be reliable and well-made. Even small problems could damage their reputation, so they focused on improving their manufacturing processes and making sure that each product met high standards. This commitment to quality would become a key part of their identity. As the company continued to grow, they also began to think more seriously about their brand. The name Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo was difficult for many people outside Japan to pronounce and remember. If they wanted to succeed globally, they needed a simpler and more memorable name. This idea would soon lead to an important change that would shape their future. At the same time, their success with transistor radios was opening new doors. They started to explore other products and technologies, looking for the next big opportunity. They were no longer just a small company trying to survive. They were becoming a company with ambition and vision. Their journey was gaining speed, and the world was slowly beginning to notice them. Even with all this progress, Ibuka and Morita knew that they were still at the early stage of something much bigger. They had proven that they could innovate and compete, but they had not yet reached their full potential. The challenges ahead would require even greater courage, creativity, and determination as they prepared to take their next bold steps into the global market. As the company continued to grow after the success of its transistor radios, Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita began to think bigger than ever before. They had already proven that they could create innovative products, but now they wanted to take a bold step, entering the global market. This was not a common move for a small Japanese company at that time. Many businesses in Japan focused only on their local market because it felt safer and more familiar. But Ibuka and Morita believed that their ideas were strong enough to compete on a global level. They wanted to show the world what their company could do. One of the biggest challenges they faced was recognition. Outside Japan, very few people had heard of their company, Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo. The name itself was difficult for foreigners to pronounce and remember. Morita understood that if they wanted to succeed internationally, they needed a name that was simple, unique, and easy to say in different languages. After careful thought, they chose a new name, Sony. This name came from the Latin word sonus, meaning sound, and also from the English slang sunny, which referred to young people. The name represented youth, energy, and creativity, which matched their vision perfectly. Changing the company name was a big decision. It was risky because they were leaving behind their original identity. Some people inside the company were unsure about this move, but Morita strongly believed that a global company needed a global name. In the end, the decision proved to be one of the most important steps in their journey. The name Sony was easy to remember, and it helped the company build a strong international brand. With a new name and growing confidence, Morita focused on expanding into the United States, one of the largest and most competitive markets in the world. This was not an easy task. American companies were already well established, and customers were loyal to brands they trusted. Entering this market required not only good products, but also smart strategies and strong determination. When Morita first traveled to the United States, he faced many difficulties. The business culture was different, and communication was not always easy. He had to learn how to negotiate, how to present his products, and how to build relationships with American partners. At times, he felt like an outsider, but he did not let that stop him. Instead, he used these challenges as learning experiences. One important moment came when an American company offered to buy a large number of Sony radios and sell them under a different brand name. This could have brought quick money and easy success. But Morita refused the offer. He believed that building the Sony brand was more important than short-term profit. He wanted customers to recognize and trust the Sony name. This decision showed his long-term vision and his belief in the company's future. To succeed in the global market, Sony also had to understand what customers wanted. American consumers, for example, liked products that were stylish, easy to use, and reliable. Sony worked hard to meet these expectations. They improved the design of their radios, making them more attractive and user-friendly. They also focused on quality, ensuring that their products performed well and lasted long. Slowly but surely, their efforts began to pay off. Sony products started to gain attention in the United States. People were impressed by the small size and convenience of their transistor radios. Young people in particular loved the idea of carrying music with them wherever they went. This created a new trend, and Sony was at the center of it. As their popularity grew, Sony expanded its presence in other countries as well. They entered markets in Europe and other parts of Asia, introducing their products to new audiences. Each market had its own challenges, but Sony adapted by learning from local customers and adjusting their strategies. This ability to understand and respond to different cultures became one of their strengths. At the same time, competition was becoming stronger. Other companies began to see the potential of transistor technology and started creating similar products. Sony could no longer rely only on its early success. It needed to continue innovating and improving to stay ahead. Ibuka and Morita encouraged their team to keep experimenting and developing new ideas. Another important step in Sony's global journey was building trust. Customers needed to feel confident that Sony products were worth their money. To achieve this, the company focused on maintaining high standards in manufacturing and design. They paid attention to details and made sure that every product reflected their commitment to quality. Over time, this helped build a strong reputation for the Sony brand. Sony also invested in marketing and storytelling. They did not just sell products, they sold a vision of the future. Their advertisements showed how technology could make life more enjoyable and convenient. This emotional connection with customers helped them stand out from competitors. As the company expanded, it also grew internally. They hired more employees, opened new offices, and built stronger systems to support their operations. Despite this growth, they tried to keep the same spirit they had at the beginning, a spirit of creativity, teamwork, and determination. The journey into the global market was not easy, but it was transforming Sony into something much bigger than it had ever been before. From a small company in a damaged building, it was becoming a recognized name around the world. Each step forward brought new opportunities, but also new challenges that required even greater effort and innovation. As Sony continued to grow and explore new possibilities, Ibuka and Morita began to look ahead once again. They were not satisfied with just radios and small electronic devices. They wanted to create something that would change not only how people use technology, but also how they experienced everyday life. And as new ideas started to take shape within the company, the stage was being set for a product that would soon capture the imagination of millions and redefine personal entertainment in a way no one had ever seen before. As Sony continued to grow in the global market, The company was already known for its innovation and bold ideas. But Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita were not satisfied with just making good products. They wanted to create something truly different, something that would change how people lived their everyday lives. They believed that technology should not only be useful, but also personal. This belief led them to one of the most important ideas in the company's history, an idea that many people first doubted, but later could not live without. At that time, music was something people mostly enjoyed at home. Radios and large tape recorders were common, but they were not easy to carry around. If someone wanted to listen to music, they usually had to stay in one place. The idea of walking outside while listening to your favorite songs was not common. But Masaru Ibuka had a simple wish. He wanted a small device that could play music while he traveled, something light and easy to carry. This small idea would soon grow into something much bigger. Sony engineers began working on this concept. They already had tape recorder technology, but the challenge was to make it smaller and more portable. This was not easy. Reducing the size of electronic devices while keeping good sound quality required careful design and new thinking. The team worked hard, testing different ideas and improving the design step by step. When the first version of the device was ready, it looked quite different from what people were used to. It was small, lightweight, and designed for personal use. It came with headphones, allowing one person to listen to music without disturbing others. This was a completely new way of experiencing sound. However, there was a problem. The device could only play music. It could not record. At that time, many people believed that a tape device should be able to both play and record. Because of this, some people inside the company were unsure if the product would succeed. Akio Morita, however, believed strongly in the idea. He saw that people did not always need to record sound. They simply wanted to enjoy music. He believed that if people tried this new device, they would understand its value. Despite doubts from others, Morita decided to move forward with the product. This decision showed once again his willingness to take risks and trust his vision. In 1979, Sony introduced the device to the world. It was called the Walkman. At first, people were confused. They did not fully understand why they would need a device that could only play music. But Sony did something very smart. Instead of just explaining the product, they showed people how to use it. They organized demonstrations where people could try the Walkman themselves. They walked around parks and streets, letting people experience the joy of listening to music while moving freely. Once people tried it, everything changed. They realized how exciting and personal it felt to carry their music everywhere. Suddenly, music was no longer limited to homes or large devices. It became something personal, something that could follow you anywhere, on a walk, on a bus, or even while relaxing outside. This new way of listening created a strong emotional connection with users. The Walkman quickly became popular, especially among young people. It gave them freedom and privacy. They could choose their own music and enjoy it without interruptions. This was a completely new experience, and it changed how people thought about music. The Walkman was not just a device, it became a part of people's daily lives. As sales increased, Sony's reputation grew even stronger. The success of the Walkman showed that the company was not afraid to challenge traditional ideas. It proved that innovation was not only about technology, but also about understanding people's needs and desires. Sony had created something that many people did not even know they wanted until they experienced it. The impact of the Walkman went beyond just sales. It started a cultural change. People began to see technology as something personal and portable. This idea would later influence many other products, such as portable CD players, MP3 players, and even smartphones. The Walkman opened the door to a new way of living with technology. Of course, success also brought new challenges. Competitors quickly noticed the popularity of the Walkman and began creating similar products. The market became more crowded, and Sony had to continue improving its designs to stay ahead. They introduced new versions of the Walkman with better sound quality, smaller sizes, and improved features. This constant innovation helped them maintain their leading position. Inside Sony, the success of the Walkman boosted confidence. Employees felt proud to be part of a company that could create such groundbreaking products. It also encouraged the company to keep thinking creatively and taking risks. They realized that some of the best ideas might seem strange at first, but with belief and effort, they could become great successes. The Walkman also strengthened Sony's global brand. It became one of the most recognized products in the world, and the Sony name became associated with innovation, quality, and creativity. This success helped the company expand into new areas and explore new possibilities. Even with all this success, Sony's leaders knew they could not stop. The world of technology was changing quickly, and new opportunities were always appearing. They needed to keep moving forward, finding new ways to surprise and inspire their customers. The story of the Walkman was a powerful example of what they could achieve, but it was not the end of their journey. As Sony continued to build on this success, they began to look at new areas where they could make an impact. They started exploring different types of technology and thinking about how they could bring innovation to even more parts of people's lives. With their confidence growing and their ambition stronger than ever, the company was preparing to take its next big steps into a future filled with even greater possibilities. After the huge success of the Walkman, Sony was no longer just an innovative company. It was now one of the most powerful names in the world of technology. The company had proven that it could create products that changed how people lived, and now it wanted to expand even further. The Sony's leaders believed that they could dominate many areas of electronics, from televisions to cameras, and even new forms of digital entertainment. This was a time of great growth, confidence, and ambition. One of the key areas Sony focused on was television technology. At the time, televisions were already common in many homes, but Sony wanted to make them better. They worked hard to improve picture quality, sound, and design. One of their most successful products was the Trinitron TV. This television offered brighter colors and clearer images than many other TVs available at the time. It quickly became popular around the world and helped Sony build a strong reputation in home entertainment. People began to trust Sony not only for small portable devices but also for large, important electronics in their homes. At the same time, Sony continued to improve its audio products. The Walkman had already changed personal music, but the company did not stop there. They created better headphones, improved sound systems, and introduced new formats for music. Sony was always thinking about how to give users a better listening experience. Their focus on quality and design made their products stand out in a crowded market. Another important area of growth was cameras and video equipment. Sony saw that people were becoming more interested in capturing moments from their lives. They wanted to take photos and record videos easily. Sony developed cameras that were more advanced but also easier to use. They also worked on video cameras, allowing families to record important events and memories. These products became very popular and helped Sony expand into new markets. During this time, Sony also entered the world of digital technology. The company understood that the future of electronics was moving from analog to digital. This meant that information, such as music and video, would be stored and processed in a different way. Sony invested heavily in research and development to stay ahead of this change. They worked on new types of storage, new devices, and new systems that could handle digital content. One of the most important developments during this period was Sony's involvement in the creation of the compact disc, or CD. Working with another company, Sony helped develop this new format for music. CDs offered better sound quality than tapes and were more durable. They quickly became popular around the world, replacing older formats. This success showed that Sony could not only create products, but also help shape the future of entire industries. Sony's ambition did not stop with electronics. The company also began to move into entertainment. They understood that technology and content were closely connected. It was not enough to create devices. They also needed to provide the music, movies, and games that people would enjoy on those devices. This idea led Sony to invest in music and film businesses, expanding beyond its original focus. As Sony grew, competition also became stronger. Other companies were trying to catch up, creating similar products and sometimes even improving on Sony's ideas. To stay ahead, Sony needed to keep innovating. They focused on creativity, encouraging their teams to think differently and come up with new solutions. This culture of innovation became one of their greatest strengths. However, rapid growth also brought new challenges. Managing such a large company was not easy. Sony had many different divisions, each working on different products and ideas. Coordinating these efforts required strong leadership and clear communication. At times, this became difficult, and some projects did not succeed as expected. But overall, the company continued to move forward. Another important factor in Sony's success was its global presence. By this time, Sony was not just a Japanese company. It was a global brand. Its products were sold in many countries, and its name was recognized around the world. This global reach allowed Sony to understand different markets and adapt its products to meet local needs. It also gave the company a strong advantage over competitors that were limited to smaller regions. Sony also focused on design. They believed that products should not only work well, but also look good. This attention to detail made their devices more attractive to customers. Whether it was a sleek television, a stylish Walkman, or a compact camera, Sony products often had a unique and modern appearance. This helped them stand out and created a strong emotional connection with users. As the company continued to grow, it reached a point where it was seen as a leader in technology. Sony was no longer following trends, it was creating them. Other companies looked at Sony's ideas and tried to copy them. This position of leadership was a sign of how far the company had come from its small beginnings in a damaged building after the war. But being at the top also meant that expectations were very high. Customers expected Sony to continue delivering amazing products. Any mistake or failure could damage its reputation. This pressure made it even more important for the company to stay focused and innovative. Inside Sony, there was a strong sense of pride. Employees knew they were part of something special. They were not just building products, they were shaping the future of technology and entertainment. This motivation helped drive the company forward, even as challenges began to appear. As the world moved further into the digital age, new types of companies started to emerge. These companies focused on computers, software, and new forms of communication. The industry was beginning to change, and Sony would soon face new kinds of competition that were very different from what it had seen before. While the company was still strong and successful, signs of change were starting to appear, and the path ahead would not be as smooth as before. After many years of success, Sony began to face a new and difficult reality. The world of technology was changing very fast, and the strategies that had once made Sony strong were no longer enough. New competitors were rising, new technologies were appearing, and customer habits were shifting in ways that the company did not fully expect. Even though Sony was still a powerful brand, cracks were starting to show beneath the surface. One of the biggest challenges Sony faced was the shift from hardware to software and digital services. In the past, Sony had been very successful by creating physical products like radios, televisions, and the Walkman. But as the world moved into the digital age, people began to care more about software, internet services, and digital platforms. Music, for example, was no longer only stored on tapes or CDs. It was now being shared and downloaded online. This change happened very quickly, and Sony was not fully prepared for it. Even though Sony had been involved in the music industry, it struggled to adapt to the new digital environment. While other companies focused on creating easy ways for people to access music online, Sony was more focused on protecting its existing business. This caused delays in innovation. As a result, other companies were able to move faster and gain an advantage in the new digital market. Another major challenge came from the rise of new competitors. Companies like Apple and Samsung started to dominate the market with fresh ideas and strong digital strategies. Apple introduced products that combined hardware and software in a simple and powerful way. Devices like the iPod and later smartphones changed how people listened to music and used technology in their daily lives. Samsung, on the other hand, became a strong competitor in televisions and mobile devices, offering high-quality products at competitive prices. Sony, which had once been a leader in innovation, now found itself trying to catch up. The company still created good products, but it was no longer always the first to introduce new ideas. In some cases, it missed important opportunities. For example, even though Sony had the technology and experience to create a strong digital music player, it did not act quickly enough to dominate that space. This allowed competitors to take the lead. Inside the company, there were also problems. Sony had grown very large, with many different divisions working on different products. While this diversity had once been a strength, it now created challenges. Communication between departments was not always smooth, and sometimes teams did not work well together. This made it harder to develop products that combined different technologies, something that was becoming more important in the digital age. Leadership changes also played a role in the company's struggles. As new leaders took control, they faced the difficult task of guiding Sony through a rapidly changing industry. Some decisions worked well, but others did not. At times, the company seemed unsure about its direction. This lack of clear focus made it harder to compete with companies that had strong and simple strategies. Financial problems began to appear as well. Some of Sony's divisions were not performing well, leading to losses. The company had to make tough decisions, including cutting costs and restructuring parts of the business. These changes were necessary, but they also showed that Sony was no longer in the strong position it once held. Another issue was the rise of mobile technology. Smartphones were becoming the center of people's digital lives. They could play music, take photos, show videos, and connect to the internet, all in one device. This reduced the need for many separate products that Sony had been known for, such as portable music players and cameras. Sony did enter the smartphone market, but it faced strong competition and struggled to stand out. Despite these challenges, Sony was not a weak company. It still had strong technology, talented employees, and valuable assets in areas like gaming and entertainment. However, it needed to find a way to adapt to the new world. The strategies that had worked in the past were no longer enough, and the company needed to rethink its approach. One important lesson during this period was that success in the past does not guarantee success in the future. Sony had been a leader for many years, but the industry had changed. Innovation was now happening in new ways, and companies needed to be faster, more flexible, and more connected to their customers. There were moments when it seemed like Sony might lose its position completely. Critics began to question whether the company could recover. Some people believed that Sony had become too slow and too complex to compete with newer, more focused companies. These doubts created pressure on the company to prove that it could still succeed. Inside Sony, however, there was still a strong belief in its potential. Many employees and leaders knew that the company had overcome challenges before. They believed that with the right changes, Sony could find a way to grow again. The key was to focus on its strengths and to adapt to the new reality of the digital world. As the company faced these difficulties, it became clear that something had to change. Sony could not continue on the same path and expect different results. It needed new ideas, new strategies, and a new sense of direction. The challenges were serious, but they also created an opportunity for transformation. And as the company began to look for ways to rebuild and reinvent itself, the next chapter of its story started to slowly take shape. After years of challenges and uncertainty, Sony reached a moment where change was no longer a choice. It was necessary. The company had faced strong competition, financial struggles, and a fast-changing digital world. But deep inside, Sony still had something powerful: its spirit of innovation and its history of creating products that changed lives. The question was not whether Sony could survive, but whether it could transform itself and rise again. One of the first steps in this transformation was a shift in focus. Instead of trying to compete in every area of technology, Sony began to concentrate on its strongest businesses. These included gaming, entertainment, and high-quality imaging technology. The company realized that it did not need to be everywhere. It needed to be excellent in the areas where it already had an advantage. Gaming became one of the most important parts of Sony's comeback. The PlayStation had already been successful in earlier years, but now it became a central focus of the company's future. With each new version, Sony improved the gaming experience, offering better graphics, faster performance, and more immersive gameplay. Players around the world connected through online gaming, creating a global community. The PlayStation brand became one of the strongest in the gaming industry, bringing both popularity and steady income to Sony. At the same time, Sony strengthened its position in the entertainment industry. Through its music and film divisions, the company produced and distributed songs, movies, and television shows enjoyed by millions of people. This gave Sony a unique advantage. Unlike many other tech companies, it was not only creating devices, but also providing the content that people used on those devices. This connection between technology and entertainment became a key part of its strategy. Sony also focused on imaging and camera technology. Even though smartphones had reduced the demand for some types of cameras, Sony found new opportunities by creating high-quality sensors used in many devices, including smartphones made by other companies. This allowed Sony to stay important in the market, even when it was not directly selling the final product. Their cameras also remained popular among professionals and content creators who needed advanced features and reliable performance. Another important part of Sony's reinvention was improving how the company operated. Leaders worked to simplify the organization, reduce unnecessary complexity, and improve communication between different divisions. This made it easier for teams to work together and develop better products. The company also became more focused on listening to customers and understanding what they truly wanted. Financial discipline also played a key role. Sony worked to reduce losses and improve profitability by focusing on successful areas and cutting back on weaker ones. These decisions were not always easy, but they helped stabilize the company and prepare it for future growth. Slowly, the company began to recover, and confidence started to return. Technology continued to evolve, and Sony adapted by combining its strengths. For example, its expertise in cameras, sensors, and entertainment allowed it to support new trends like content creation, streaming, and digital media. Instead of falling behind, Sony found ways to be part of the new digital world. One of the most important lessons Sony learned during this journey was the value of balance. In the past, the company had sometimes focused too much on hardware without fully understanding the importance of software and services. Now it worked to combine both. It created ecosystems where devices, content, and services work together smoothly, providing a better experience for users. The story of Sony is not just about success or failure, it is about resilience. From a small company in a broken building after World War II to a global leader in technology and entertainment, Sony has gone through many changes. It has experienced great victories and difficult setbacks, but through all of this, it has continued to move forward. Today, Sony is seen as a company that has learned from its past. It understands that the world can change quickly, and that staying successful requires constant innovation and adaptation. It also shows that even the strongest companies can face challenges, but with the right mindset, they can recover and grow again. The legacy of Sony goes beyond its products. It has influenced how people listen to music, watch movies, play games, and use technology in their daily lives. From the first transistor radios to the Walkman, from televisions to PlayStation, Sony has helped shape modern culture in many ways. For future generations, Sony's journey offers important lessons. It shows the importance of taking risks, believing in new ideas, and never giving up, even when things become difficult. It also shows that success is not permanent. Companies must continue to evolve and improve to stay relevant. As Sony continues to move forward, it carries with it a rich history of innovation and transformation. The company that once struggled to survive is now a symbol of creativity and resilience. And while the future will bring new challenges and opportunities, Sony's story proves that with vision, determination, and the courage to change, it is always possible to rise again.